and it's a great benefit that I had to work with young people who wanted to make a difference in their own community. But I learned how to talk effectively and how to write effectively. And I think we forget how writing is still very important. 2 careers later, I think what shocks me now is how limited the information that elected officials in any country, some countries are better than others, have when making decisions.
Alex, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I remember the first time I met Alex, it was in Nicosia. It was a program sponsored by the British High Commission to educate young lawyers from both communities about mediation and alternative methods of dispute resolution. And, in all these seminars, the trainer always tries to break the ice and answer these questions that there is complete silence and nobody jumps in to answer. And then it was Alex, from the background, trying to, facilitate the training seminar. And I knew Alex from the Twitter community. He was very active with his political and economic
He means
tweets.
I was a troll.
Yeah.
He means I was a Twitter troll.
Yeah, I tried to put it politely. But thanks for that, Alex. And then I went and talked to him like, hello, Alex. Nice to meet you. I know you digitally, but it's good to meet you also face to face. And then we bonded and we had like a very, very genuine and friendly relationship. So Alex, thank you for coming to the podcast today and looking forward to very insightful discussions with you.
Yeah, congrats for this idea, guys.
Yeah, great to have you.
So, born and raised in Cyprus.
Born and raised in Cyprus, born and raised in Nicosia. I feel very close to Nicosia, maybe obsessively close to Nicosia. And I know I'm speaking while we're in Limassol, but I feel very, very close to Nicosia. Hopefully, at one point in the future, I'll make it justice as well by writing a history of the city, maybe. But yeah, born and raised in the 80s, it was a very different city than now. It was a city that was sort of finding its feet after the invasion in 1974. It was when, although my mother is originally from the central Nicosia.
Inside the walls?
Yeah, inside the walls, yeah, in actually from Tartakala, which is, if you want to know, I saw where my mom was born for the first time in 2004 when I crossed over for the first time.
Okay, so it was in the north and
yes,
side.
And it's right next to the Hagia Sophia Mosque right now. So they left in 1958, but I always felt that I sort of belonged to that Nicosia in the world. And at least in the 80s and early 90s, it was very funny that it was not the place to be. It was, if you said you'd like to live there, people would say, oh, I'm so sorry for you, or, like, can we help you financially in any way? And it's great now to see.
It was the hood.
Yeah, really, and really, really was. And it's so great to see now, at least, both culture and counterculture there, right?
And I saw this. There is this guy on Twitter who makes these, random geographic threads about. In Europe, they used to drive on the right and then left anyway. And then they said the best designed cities in Europe, that they still keep the Venetian walls of the cities, like they were designing these cities to protect them from invaders. And Nicosia was one on the top 10.
Yeah.
And you can still visually see from above, like you come with the plane, you can see the walls, that they're very well maintained. And
Christos, behind something like that, there's always a legion of people will never find their names who fought hard for it. And it's very interesting because they're pioneers of something that saw something maybe way ahead of their time. I'm quite sure, in fact, I know for a fact how often people wanted to tear down that wall, either when cars were brought in or where they needed building materials, etc. So the same with the walls. I would say the same with our forests in Cyprus. There were 5, 10, 20, 30 people, not always for selfish reasons, sometimes for non-selfish reasons, but quite often for just because they appreciate the value. And that's the reason we can have that sort of place still there. Yeah. It's just food for thought, maybe for what we're doing today about...
we demolish all the historic buildings and build skyscrapers. Don't know how the people in 300 years will feel like.
Yeah, I mean, and it's for me personally, and we'll get into it as an economic historian, I see the biggest tragedy is industrial buildings, especially, right? So, industrial buildings, I'm in Limassol, we're right next to the industrial heartland of Limassol, but I don't think there's many of those industrial buildings left, while maybe with some more imagination, maybe some more investment as well, you could see something exceptionally beautiful coming out, which sort of persevered the old but kept the new. I won't forget, I won't name the city, but there is a university where I had the pleasure of actually teaching, where their library was their old power station. And the one side of the reading room was the coal storage. Something like that can be just so... It can shape a community. It can, but yeah, also there. Yes, from Nicosia.
Take us through where did you go to school? What were your preferences and how you end up?
Yeah, I had a really blessed childhood.
Okay.
Really blessed childhood. Son of a civil servant and an English teacher, with 2 sisters, both older. I'm the youngest, so already blessed because they fought all the fights and
they had the hard times.
They had the hard time. Plus, they protected me from many things. I would say almost ideal, as you see with kids on bicycles going around doing low-key mischief. Nothing much to say about that. Things got slightly more complicated when I got to school, because it's quite funny. I still have a very good friend, hi Gotchos, if you see this, which we were friends from primary school, actually preschool. And he nicknamed me, that he still calls me that, scientist, because he always thought that...
Spot on.
Yeah.
You were wearing glasses at preschool?
No, I wasn't. But I was actually when we started primary school, I was probably one of the weakest students there. And I remember him because he kept saying, no, you're still the scientist, right? That's your nickname. It's given to you. You're not allowed to change nicknames. But I can't. While now that I'm older, I can see how that shaped quite a lot of my life. I was very lucky. My parents, with other people, set up the Cyprus Dyslexia Association, and then a long fight that I wasn't that aware of, but I got much more aware of when I became a teenager myself, started to ensure that, whatever weaknesses the education system had in the 80s and 90s wouldn't keep me behind.
So you are dyslexic.
Yes.
And
I am.
Yeah, you are. You can't fight that. You can't fight it. Yeah. And at high school, you had this, I don't know, social pressure or teachers that were not supporting, and you were thinking like dropping out of the ordinary, high school trajectory and doing something else, or
the thing I think people do not understand or misunderstand about learning difficulties is the child with learning there's no one harder than to the child than the child itself when they are in that situation, right? I mean, they are self-aware.
Sorry to interrupt you, but when I was at high school, I remember if they spotted someone with learning difficulties, they would recommend them, high school is not for you. You should go to become an electrician. You should go become a chef. You should, you can never study. You can never because you have learning
Yeah.
difficulties.
But that's if you want, that's the
you?
second step. The first step is that there's no one harder than the
Of
person
course.
who's experiencing on
Until you
themselves.
figure out that you have this, you mean?
Even after,
Okay.
I think because you know, as you're growing up, you look at the social norm and you realize that maybe it's very difficult for you in one particular way. I can speak from my experience of dyslexia, that's mine, but you can see for others, it can be something else. It's hard to fit in that. And then comes the institutional that Christos is describing, where the institution, for whatever reason, has a framework and goes through that framework. Christos, you're right. I mean, in my case, it was you're too lazy, and you know, there was some unauthorized corporal punishment also possibly at times, but we're talking about a very different age. But I wouldn't say it's changed as much, because even now in education, you know, people try and stay with the frameworks, and they say, well, okay, let's categorize you as A, therefore this is what you should get. Or the biggest breath of fresh air for me was going to university. I was lucky to go to university in the UK, and it was a sitting like you here, where we had a conversation of what would you feel you need to feel that it's fair competition with everyone else of your peers, but also feel supported. And it was the first time anyone had asked me, right, about what is it, you know? So I think there was a lot of that pressure, and there was a lot of that personal pressure, mainly personal, right? Knowing that, you know, I might want to write a story about spaceships in Zeus, but that would mean using the Greek word for spaceship, which is the astimoplio, which is a hard word to spell. So I would just make more boring stories to avoid perhaps difficult challenges. Yeah, so I had a deal, an unofficial deal, to go down the trades, as you said. But my parents, with a lot of support and fantastic people who weren't necessarily trained, but had an X factor in teaching and transmitting knowledge. And I sat the exams for the English school. I came last of, I think I was the last or the one after me who was actually accepted, because that year, for whatever reason, quite a lot of people rejected positions. And I started, it wasn't...
Were you happy? Big party after hearing the results? Do you remember?
No, I was... You know, I knew, even then, I mean, we're talking 12, 13, right? Even then I knew it was like rolling the dice again, because it meant really learning a language, English, which I did know, but not very well, but knowing it at an older age. So even then I could see the opportunity of someone with not a lot. I mean, I'm very lucky also. I don't feel my particular learning disabilities are, I found quickly, thanks to support, ways to overcome most of them. But for me, I knew also there was a lot of pressure. Like, okay, there's a second chance here. You can learn a language. You can go to a different education system. You can roll a dice. But then also, you know, you knew you had to deliver.
How did it end? What was your graduation grade?
No, so I started with, I think, an A in PE, which wasn't deserved, and an A in religious studies, which definitely wasn't deserved. I ended up with having all A's in A-level and going to my choice university, which was University of Durham. And I think, again, you know, I've been very blessed. I just want to say...
So you've beaten the forecasts?
I think my support network made sure I beat the forecast.
So it's very important to have support.
Yeah, and
it's not only being lucky or being disciplined and...
Yeah, if you want to join it to the world, I think a lot of people who feel, without taking away from their success, acknowledging how either a system or people supported them is not a weakness, right? For me, it's even bigger. It's a better leadership trait, actually, to acknowledge that you've become, let's say, a leader in your field, while actually the steps that took you there were not in isolation, right? So yeah, I was incredibly lucky to get where I got, to have the people that I had around me, and even in issues of friends, even that support network where it was never a big deal. We made dyslexia joke between us, took all that social pressure out, and I ended up, after serving the military, heading off to Durham, being was before the big impact of Cypriots in the UK, before we joined the EU. So I think in Durham, which is quite far north, I think there were 6 Cypriots.
Okay.
And we're all there because we didn't want to have a lot of Cypriots around us, not because we had a problem with it, but we wanted to actually interact with other people, right?
How was the military experience?
I mean, military experience was
graduate from
exactly.
a private school, going
it was
to the
best.
military.
Yeah, exactly. It was the best. I mean, it was the. At the time, of course, I would complain all the time, but looking at it, I think it brought me a lot of humility, and it brought me a real understanding. I mean, it's the beginning of the journey to understand. Okay, you have some privileges, right? You are from as you said, a school. I still remember that, like the lieutenant decided to put me at one point to be head of leave, and which was quite a prestigious point, because you could at least pick when you would go out, because the other lieutenant took another one from a private school, and he wanted to sort of one up him, saying, I got one from the English school. So even there you see how the privilege worked. But really, I met fantastic people that perhaps I wouldn't have met, and I also learned, humility, right? I mean, doing 14 hours, I didn't go to officer exam. I failed at it. That was another great thing that happened, because the day I got my A-level grades that were 4As was the day I found out I couldn't become an officer, because I did really badly at the exams, which were in Greek, which links to all the other issues as well. But I think it was really great to look at that, and also understand that it's okay. You can acknowledge where you come from, but also sort of find other ways of connecting with other people. And by the way, I think that's the one thing that's, being stuck with some people from all walks of life in a long summer with not a lot of leave. Either you find ways, all of you collectively find ways around it, or you go mad.
For me, the military experience was, in 2 years you learn a lot of things, but the most valuable lesson was to be outside your the family space.
Yeah, sure.
And facing unfairness, injustice, gossips. It was like the society compressed into your barracks, and it really matures. You remember when I went to study 19, 20 years old in the UK, the English students that they were 18, I thought I was 5, 6 years old.
Yeah.
Like they were so immature, whereas they just came out of the family nest, whereas we went 2 years in the army. We're so...
Yeah. Where did you serve?
In Nicosia.
Yeah.
Nicosia.
On the Green Line?
Not on the Green Line, but on the border around Nisu.
How about you, Andres?
I can't remember what the names are, but it's Zioenteka, Zioenteka 3, and
Nicosia.
I was there too.
It's all at the Green Line.
I mean, that's a different experience. That's why I'm asking. I mean, that's a different,
because from the opposite side, on the border. You feel the
time slows down there, right?
Yeah.
Time slows down, and if
you have roommates. You have 12 roommates, right? So
and then it's got incredibly intense small moments, right? If anything, it reminds me, if you read like something like Moby Dick or something, like long moments of boredom, some moments of reflection, some kind of coming together, and then frantic tiny amounts of space where things would happen. In our case was someone walked into no man's land or something like that, or there were shots fired or whatever. It happens sometimes, right? I mean, nothing major ever happened, but that sort of mental space, I think it gives you a lot of, as you said, that's where for me, and I'm assuming for you, that's where I grew up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In that time between.
Huge learning curve, or at least maturing emotionally as a person. So off to Durham, studying economics
and
history, and then you did your master's.
Yeah,
in the
economics.
UK.
I mean, I really love history. I always wanted to be a historian, but I always felt.
But you are a scientist, so you had to invent something, no?
I think what really attracts me to economics is it's actually philosophy, right? We forget about it, but economics is just a small subsection of philosophy that uses a lot of maths, and then we bolt on a statistical part, right, that tests whether that theory is actually valid in the real world. I think what really attracts me to economics, and that's why I never wanted to go pure something, was that, thinking hard about a topic is fun. And actually, in my whole life, and I think you'll see it, doing one thing, I'm probably not the best single frame mind. I like to multitask. So I think having two very different fields and getting two very different ways of approach, or even how to tackle issues, was the best experience for me. And that's why I did economics and history.
What was the most vulnerable moment you remember when you were in your studies?
Yeah, so knowing that you have a learning disability, but knowing that you've reached your goals, there's two ways of doing it. One is working really hard at one. One is, being a bit strategic also about what you choose. So I always had an inherent fear of maths, even though I'm not necessarily bad at it, but I had an inherent fear that I would hit a wall, that because I was defined, rightly so, as, not all people who have dyslexia have, difficulties in maths, but there's a high correlation. So I always intensely was afraid that I would hit a barrier. And in the end, that barrier never came. But it probably never came because I would do 90% of my time doing maths and 10% of my time doing anything else. But, that was again, in hindsight, that was a moment where, and I think in hindsight, I would have just done pure maths just to show and give myself confidence that even though I probably wouldn't have liked it as much as the theory, but finding sort of like the inner strength to do it, that was a weak moment. But again, a brilliant experience. Durham is a fantastic place to study.
And where did you do your master's after? Or where did you apply? Did you get to the first university you applied for?
No, so
a lot of success there.
I think I cheekily wanted to try Oxford and Cambridge since school. Since the beauty of having the army is you first got your results and then you applied. So I applied in Oxford and didn't get in. Then I applied to Oxford and Cambridge for a master, didn't get in both. And I applied to a particular course at the LSE, London School of Economics. Mm-hmm. That was economics and economic history, thinking the same way, a bit of both. Mm-hmm. And I got a call that I would be rejected because economics didn't think I had enough maths. So there goes, it's almost like a wheel of sort of self-affirmation. But I insisted that, give me an exam and I'll try it. So instead, economic history came with the alternative to join them as a pure economic history student, but at a 1+, at the same time apply for a scholarship that covered both master's and PhD, and was lucky to be accepted. So I was actually fully funded. Wow. I was the only master's students I remember who knew I would be a PhD student the next year. So, I had a very...
I'm sure you had still to get good grades.
Yes,
you didn't spend
you still had
much of your time drinking.
No, you still had to actually get a very, very close to a first to get in, of course, but a distinction to get in. But of course, it meant I could avoid the pain of doing your master's and also applying for jobs, which probably how difficult it can be. Yeah. But yeah, so I ended up doing economic history at the LSE. Probably, again, a very lucky decision. Wouldn't regret it. almost walked away in the first week when I realized how different it was than anything I've done before, and then never looked back. And it's actually one of the things I love teaching, exactly because I think it's that interesting.
And then you came back to Cyprus doing what? I mean,
there's a step there before. So
there's a step.
So the good news about being a funded PhD student is someone funds you. The bad news is when you run out of money, right? You run out of money. So I decided to get a postdoc position at the University of Warwick while wrapping up my PhD. And there I was in discussions with the Central Bank of Cyprus for a particular project. And I was then with my partner and now wife, and we moved in together, and we looked around and we said, well, maybe it's time to go home. Maybe it's time to live in Cyprus. I was away from Cyprus now for 10 years up to that point. So we jumped the gun. We came back. The project with the Central Bank of Cyprus didn't then happen. So that was another vulnerable moment where you came in after 10, 11 years of everyone saying, well, you're so great. Here's some money to study. Here's a postdoc at a really good university. And then I was unemployed for 9 months.
And did you live inside the walls of Nicosia? That was the rent
tried.
was cheap.
Yeah, no, I tried, but by that time it was picking up and it was getting harder and harder. But I definitely tried. I can tell you for a fact, if you know Nicosia and you know where Kalakathumena is, I tried to rent in that building, but it was nigh on impossible. And then I realized it was probably a bad idea. But yeah, personally, the one thing I would love to teach, like let's say my kids, we'll get there, that I know I have, but I have no idea how I developed it. I don't know if it's innate. I don't know if it's developed. I don't know. It's what I went through. 'Cause as I said, I was pretty blessed. Is just that, do you know the honey badger? Do you know the animal, the honey badger?
No, I don't.
So a honey badger is an incredibly grumpy animal, right? It's sort of very isolated even from other honey badgers, but they don't give up ever. And their favorite snack is cobras. They're probably the only animal that actually eats poisonous snakes, and they get bitten, but they keep going at it. If something I think I have or developed and was really useful, especially in my downtimes, is that sort of honey badger vibe. Like, I get very grumpy, but I'll find a way. I'll do something else.
Resilience.
Resilient, grit.
Yeah.
Maybe in English is grit, but grit with a kind of grumpy attitude back, right? Like the one person I can think in history that probably had a bit of that is slightly Churchillian. With no ways am I comparing myself with Churchill, but that kind of grumpy grit. Right? Yeah, so I ended up being unemployed. I started my own consultancy business, and then in parallel got appointed in a couple of universities. My first university job in Cyprus was in Limassol, actually, just down the road.
But you didn't move here?
I did. I moved here for 9 months.
Really?
And I have to say, and again,
I'm surprised
I think I'm going to be thrown out of the window.
I'm surprised you became a Limassol resident and left.
Okay, controversial opinion. From all I've said, I feel that Nicosia is nicer in the winter than Limassol. And I was here over the winter.
But winter in Cyprus is 3 weeks. Summer is the rest.
You're right. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. And then ended up coming to the European University Cyprus, while keeping not the consultancy per se, but the subject of the consultancy, which was the Cypriot government debt. Because my first and only client as a consultant was on the Cyprus debt when I came here and I was unemployed. And I realized that Cyprus at that time was having grave difficulties and sort of kept at it.
When was that?
So that's 2010.
So, wait a second. We managed to get into Eurozone 2008?
Right.
So we passed the test to become members of the Eurozone.
In 2004, Cyprus joins
the European Union.
With an asterisk. Europe loves asterisks. The first thing you should know about Europe is there's always an asterisk.
Even the flag has a lot of asterisks.
Yes. Our personal asterisks are two protocols, Protocol 3 and Protocol 10. The important protocol for us is Protocol 10, which is actually the protocol that says that we joined as a whole island, but in the areas not under the control of the Republic of Cyprus, the European Union law is suspended.
Correct.
Right? And that's important, maybe for our discussions later. By 2008, we followed an incredibly traditional and strict financial policy in order to get into the Eurozone. By getting into the Eurozone in 2008, the restrictions of that were in place effectively to allow us to get into the Eurozone were eased. But at the same time, the Greek and then European financial crisis started. So what happened is we ended up becoming a country with a government that felt quite loose because it got into the EU and felt now in the Eurozone. Now we can be more Mediterranean.
Let's spend more money. Let's spend more money.
It will be less Northern European, more Mediterranean on one hand. And at the other hand, we had an incredible growth of short-term money coming in Cyprus that had no interest, unlike now, had no interest to stay, but was just looking at a place to go, to the point where by 2011, the deposits in the banking system were 800% the GDP, the income of the country. So that's when I started looking at this, saying, well, how sustainable is this? And then you kept getting more and more alarmist calls when you realize, okay, it's 2010 yet. We were not aware that the banks were in that hot water. But when you looked at the size of the banks and then you looked at the size of the government, you started realizing, okay, but it doesn't take a lot to topple both, right? So, when your banks are 800% of the income of your whole country, right? And if they have a sneeze, the government has pneumonia.
And I'm sure you made all these reports, alarms to the government, and they said, okay, let's listen to Alex. He's a scientist and expert here. Let's follow his suggestions and avoid the crisis. This is what happened. By
that time, I was appointed at the European University Cyprus, but and it's changing, and I'm happy about it. But in Greek, the word akademaiki prosengisi, and I think your brother will tell you that as well, was almost used as a slur, right? So,
hey, he's academic. Don't
yes,
listen to
he doesn't know the market. Yeah.
He's an academic. He likes to talk.
Yeah.
Just write.
But the
practical
thing
impact.
Is, people outside, numbers are numbers. People outside started looking at it. And there was
the credit agencies.
The credit rating agencies started looking at it. Exactly. Our bonds started sliding down. We had an inverse where our short-term bonds, had a lower return than our long-term bonds because people could see, okay, long-term bonds, I can make a lot of money because they're discounted, right? You had all these sort of signs of a crisis. And as an economic historian, my specialty was the Great Depression of 1929. So I would look at that and then I would read, okay, what happened with Latin America? What happened to Argentina? And then you would see quite a lot of similarities. So there was a lot of cognitive dissonance where you came here and people said everything is fine. And then when you went abroad, people were saying, are you okay? What's happening there? And that grew and grew and grew to the point where it was pretty much unsustainable. And I think there is where I started being slightly more vocal, especially after the very severe explosion at the Evangelos Florakis naval base, known as the Marie explosion, that took out our electricity power station for about 2 years. And that's where I think my first major piece of work that was more populist than academic came out, where I was saying, this is a national emergency. Let's put a policy together to go through it.
So what were you doing that on your own, or was it part of your job? What was
Totally on my own.
your own initiative based on the
Yeah.
research that you were conducting?
Totally on my own, and then you would start collecting allies that were also worried.
Yeah.
So over time, you started collecting allies where there were people that saw, okay, we're worried about the same thing, for example.
Yeah.
And then that would escalate in that period in March 2013, where quite a lot of people behind the scenes were trying to support those that were in front.
Yeah.
Not because they had any sort of relationship, but because there were some of us that were thinking about that for 3 years. They didn't know what was going to happen, but they were thinking about it for 3 years.
Did you change your job after from the European University?
No, wait. What happened is the bailout happened, and
Okay.
that first. So the bailout happened, and the then President Anastasiadis asked me to be in his national economic advisors with 10 other economists, and we weren't being paid, and we wouldn't ask it. But it meant that we would regularly meet policymakers and the European Commission, the so-called Troika, to discuss issues. And there although I can't say I was, I think the council as a whole, I think we had a very different idea what it would be from what the president wanted it to be. But I think there I really saw how policy happens. And if you want, let's go back to what we said. I understood why some people said, oh, this is an academic approach, and they saw it as a slur. I don't think it's a fair slur, but I could see that quite often academics didn't spend the time to think of how to effectively
implement the
to have an impact.
To have an impact.
Not
and
just
also
write another article and just put it in a library and just...
Well, it's also, having a bit of realpolitik there. So, for example, if you're talking to an elected official and you're telling him, do this because it's really good for the country, right? Even if he wants to do good for the country, that's one of 5 factors he has to put into consideration.
Yeah.
So if you can actually say it's good for your country, it might help this particular part of the electorate that you might want to do, but it's also going to find these people outside your door screaming. If you cannot convince someone that you've thought of that, then I will not be surprised why they will not listen to you when they're making decisions.
Yeah.
But based on that, when the opportunity arose to be a chief economist at the British High Commission, where I met you, I jumped at the chance and headed over there.
So overall, you would say being involved with the, let's say, establishment or the political space, it wasn't something that you really felt it was mature enough to have an impact. You were a bit disappointed, let's put it like that.
Yes, but I think what makes me now, so 2 careers later, I think what shocks me now is how limited the information that elected officials in any country, some countries are better than others, have when making decisions. I think when we're sitting here, we're thinking that for all decisions, there's boffins that crunch numbers in hats, and there's meetings after meetings.
Maybe Christos thinks that, I don't.
Yeah, maybe.
He has high expectations of decision-making governments.
Yeah, always say, they did this because of that. Like, this is a rule book,
Yeah.
And I don't think like there is a malintention behind it. And then Andreas tells me, no, they did this in order to.
But the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Of course, yeah.
Because there might be malintention. Most often they're not. There's misinformation.
Correct.
As well. And then most often than not there's incredibly limited time to make decisions, and no one takes the time to actually inform people well. The most beautiful, and I say the word beautiful, service I saw in the UK, when I had the pleasure to work as part of the broader family of the UK civil service, was the government, the Parliament Research Service, where any parliamentarian can ask any question from science to biology and they have to deliver a 4-pager max. So what that really does, if you are able to deliver information in a very succinct and effective way, is you can actually have a big impact. And from my time in the British High Commission, I met you, and it's a great benefit that I had to work with young people who wanted to make a difference in their own community. But I learned how to talk effectively and how to write effectively. And I think we forget how writing is still very important. It's probably more important now in terms of texting, and it's probably more important than it was even 10 years ago.
You know, when ChatGPT was released and everybody was excited to use it, of course I used it at the beginning, but then I realized that it took away my writing skills and my communication skills, because it's a hack. You tell it, do this and do that, and then they just give you a result, and then you kind of fix it and make it read or sound better. And but for me, I stopped using it because I lost my communication and effective writing skills.
I use it in a very different way. So I write something, and then I ask it to see whether it would work at this audience or that audience or another audience. Yeah. And what it allows me to do, whether it's, we can argue and you'd be right to say, but can represent that audience. It allows me to think of the diversity of the audience. So when I actually come with a effective communication, is not for the 10 people in the room, it's for the 100 people.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of giving a speech in Cyprus and saying to ChatGPT, take these 1,000 words that I prepared. Imagine in the audience there is a priest, there is a government minister, there is a head school, there are Rokinotarchis, I don't know.
Yeah. Then ban words, ban some words. It would catch
80% men in the audience. And then fix it.
But it's part of ever learning. Like even in when I teach, I found myself that I'm a very energetic teacher, but I would turn around to write on the board, even as simple as that, and still talk. Mm-hmm. And, just taking a step back. What I use ChatGPT is to take a step back and think of how inclusive I am in what I do, how effective I am in communicating. And I don't accept it word for word, of course.
Yeah.
But if you want a physical example of that is, I've been teaching 13 years. 3 years ago, I stop talking while trying to write on the board because I had no one there to tell me. And then I had to think about it myself and realize, actually, for someone who English is their second language or they're hard of hearing, or they might have something that they're not willing to disclose with me, and it's perfectly okay. I actually made it so far harder to understand what I'm saying. Right?
How are your effective communication skills in practice with your 3 kids? Do they listen to their dad?
Yeah, no. I have 3 kids. They're 11, 9, and 6. And when you have the 3rd child, you do develop effective communication skills because you run out of hands or you run out of parents, and then negotiation is the only way. Well, there's also shouting, but that only gets you that far. Negotiation is the only way out of it. But the kids, what really I love about having a family is the things you didn't expect. So, for example, you'll hear many people say, have 2 children because of X. We have 3, and we find that each of the children affects the other positively in a way we didn't expect, and affects us positively in a way we didn't expect. Like, I think my middle child is very outgoing and helps the others to be more outgoing, while my eldest child, probably likes things that are slightly too mature for his age, but that allows the younger to also assess. So we can enjoy things as a family more. The youngest is just, much more culture oriented that I would ever be. So what I love about, I never expected when we started a family is how much you change each other and you interact. And I think, especially in COVID, that was like accelerated by 100 or 100,000. I feel quite blessed, even though it was a stressful situation as in most, that in the house we had a household of 5, which meant it was harder to go stir crazy or feel the pressure of the walls coming in, that I know that either single parent families or families that are of a smaller nature would probably feel that much more intensely.
One last question, Alex, and I want you to be honest with us. On Twitter, other than trolling people, you're posting regularly your culinary inventions. So your friend called you scientist because we're hoping that you invent something great, but you are just inventing a lot of recipes. Do you regret studying economics and history and not becoming a master chef?
That's a great question. I don't regret it because I would being a good, I love what I do, but also I know I would love, going down the chef career, which was actually what I was considering. I was around 15, 16. I was thinking of dropping out from the English school and becoming a chef. I know you know it. That's why you mentioned it. Thank you for bringing it up. I don't think I would have been able to structure my family life in the way by being a chef, because it's an exceptional job. It's very tough, but also it has different hours. It's not about, I know there's chefs that are exceptional parents, but it would take away those magic moments. For example, being there when they go to bed, or less magic moments, being there when you need to make them have a bath.
Okay, I found another job for you then. You'll be the Anthony Bourdain, but tasting historical recipes that have been forgotten. So we'll combine economics, history, and food, and you'll go, 400 years back and try recipes.
I can tell you an amazing story of one of my favorite content creators now in Max Miller. So Max Miller was single in the lockdown and was furloughed, being put temporary. He didn't feel he could cook well, but loved history. He made his own history cooking channel that has about 1.5 million subscribers right now. So let's, rest in peace, Anthony Bourdain. Let's go. But also, Max Miller did just that, and it's fantastic. I've used some of his recipes. I've done, which one I have done?
I have no idea about this. I don't know what he's talking about, but,
It's a fantastic YouTuber that takes history and finds recipes. The one recipe I will never do is when he boiled leather and ate leather, because that's what people did in the past when they didn't have any, right? The recipe I want to do from his channel is cucumber ice cream. But the recipe I have done is he has done the recipe of different classes in the Titanic, and I've done some of them. And, then we can sit and say, this is exactly what they fed the Titanic before it hit the iceberg, which is exceptional. So, I'd love to do. I wouldn't be as good as Max Miller, but I'd love to have Max Miller's job.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Alex, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.